This video is going to cover the first 6 games from a double Bongcloud daily tournament I was in, and this will be round 1 essentially of the tournament. First 6 games, next video will be round 2, so let's jump right into it. So it starts with e4, e5, king e2, king e7, and the game kind of goes from there. So this actually followed a game that Sevi and I played a couple of years ago, a correspondence game. We never made it too much further, and ours looked pretty similar to this. I made a couple mistakes here going through, but okay. So Engine wants me to play this move, push the knight away first, just to kind of relieve the tension, and then I can push this pawn, get a really big, strong center. What that would look like is just something like this, and then the knight has to choose kind of an unideal square to go to. This obviously wouldn't be great, but at the very least, my pieces get out, quickly. I have my bishop getting out pretty quick, and it's pretty easy to get my queen in the game, and my king's actually super safe here. But didn't do that, but did something a little bit similar. Just put the bishop out first. He moved the knight back anyway, and this doesn't actually win the piece, obviously, because black can just take here with the pawn, but you gotta be careful. You have to do something about that quickly. Unfortunately, however, this does lose the pawn because obviously this knight can't take back. So I'm up a pawn already, small advantage. At this point, I looked at a couple different options for moves here. There's a lot that really can be done. I don't have to exit this pin immediately. I can try to force him to bring maybe his bishop up or weaken his king side. Not that he's going to castle, obviously, because he can't. Maybe that wouldn't be terrible, but I decided to do the development move, which is get this bishop in the game, get him over here on this diagonal. Game here he goes. He moves his bishop out, and at this point, I say, well, let me go ahead and just take this. Now, obviously, you can't take back with a knight because then you drop the queen. So you're forced to take back. And then, on the previous move, it wouldn't have been so clean. But now I can kind of mess up his pawn structure a bit by here. I takes. And so taking with the king is the best move, surprisingly. But I've got a huge advantage here. Now, I obviously see why I should have moved here because it allows my king to go up here potentially in the next move after I take. And then I can do something like this. And that could be pretty big, but I didn't take. Now, obviously, I thought to myself, well, if he takes here, then I move my knight back out, and that's obviously the best move. But ideally, it wants me to take here for the same reason that you have to take back, but this knight is just doing a great job. You're going to have to expend some energy just to get rid of it, and then obviously I have queen a3 check, which is pretty nice, but I didn't see that in the game. Took with the knight. Then I checked because there's nothing you can do about it. And then I moved the bishop back. Now, I think it wants me to go back here so I can maybe move it back around this way. Just because this might not be as good of a place to bring it. But I digress. Game goes on. Get my rooks in the game. And then it says it's the best move. I feel like it was a weak move in the game to just go ahead and take this piece. Just because I'm kind of fixing his pawn structure. But with queens off the board, being up a pawn and me having a rook on the 7th rank, I just thought I've got this fantastic pawn structure here. Obviously this pawn's weak, and so I have to be careful about that, but I've got this great pawn structure for my dark squared bishop. Most of his pawns are on dark squares, so it kind of sucks for his bishop. My rook's in the 7th rank. Both of his rooks are back here. My king's in a great position. My rook's going out to g1. I just thought this was huge. So moving along here. Okay, now I can take the pawn. This actually was very similar to a game I played against someone in the previous tournament where you move the rook up, then I do the check in the back rank, and it forces the rook back, and then I take then. I decided to do this just for the sake of whichever rook you take, I get to keep one of my good rooks on the 7th rank. I get to keep this king stuck back there. So he takes that way. And now, obviously, you have to move this rook over. If you don't move the rook over, let's just say you play some other, I don't know, random move. F5 works because you defend the rook. Let's just say you play a move where you're just going to manage your pawns forward. This doesn't work for the fact that I have this tactic taking the rook. So, you can't do that. Plays rook f8. I still check. And it was probably a dumb move. I took the rook because I saw the fact that I was going to win his h-pawn, and I just thought, I've got a pass pawn over here. I've got a pass pawn over here. And then I've got still a pawn majority against him in the center. Being out 3 pawns was going to be more than enough. And then at this point, it's all over. So there's really nothing you can do to stop. I'm going to get one of these pawns to pass, and even if you sack your bishop for 2 or 3 of them, I'm still going to have a bishop versus these 2 pawns. The tension here is going to break, and I'm going to win the game. So with that down, 1 victory and a few more to go. Okay, so this is my round 2 game against the same player, and I'm going to kind of skip towards the center of the game because there was a huge opening up of the position, which was just absolutely crazy. There was a tactic that both of us missed here that would have allowed him a pretty good advantage, so I made the move a6, which is a mistake because this is actually a free pawn right here. Can't take back with the pawn because of the pin by the queen, and I can't take back with this knight, obviously, so I have to run away. Takes, and then even if you start with a move like this, he's actually still up a pawn. And then if you just simplify for the sake of simplifying, although this wouldn't be a good way, obviously once I defend this bishop, I'm possibly going to win a second pawn, and then black, he can't castle because it's a Bongcloud tournament, but this is a pretty good position for white. Positionally, it's close to equal according to the engine, but he's obviously up a pawn, so I'd rather take him. So thankfully for me, he missed a 6 threat, and then it doesn't work here anymore, obviously, because the bishop's no longer there, so I can take back. So I should have moved back here. This was kind of just a move to get the bishop into the game, possibly here or even over here. But the game goes on. And now he basically has, it's not technically a Pillsbury Knight, which a Pillsbury Knight is technically it's supposed to be on e4 or e5, but it's a knight in the center of the board on e4, e5, supported by 2 pawns that shouldn't be able to be kicked away. Technically speaking, if I get my knight out of the way, I can play c6, and it's not truly a Pillsbury pawn, but it is a pretty big fat center, and there's no easy way to get rid of it. Okay. Building on here, both of us are making some mistakes, but the game is basically equal. And now I have a huge choice to make here. So obviously I need to move the knight away because I don't want to lose it for nothing. But what's the best way to do that? And is there a way I can do it with tempo? What I decided on doing after looking at a lot of options, like, well, can I put my knight here possibly? And then maybe there's some, you know, if you're moving here and you're moving here, maybe there's some, you know, triple discovered quadruple checks or something like that. But what I decided was, okay, I'm going to move my pawn forward. Now, obviously, you can't take because then I take the queen. So if you decide to move the queen out of the way, then I take here. And then if you take back, then I take. And if you take again, then I take here. And at the end of the day, I'm up a piece. So that's huge for me, obviously. So you can't allow that. And so, well, what's the next best option? We don't want to just lose a piece for nothing. So maybe you can start by taking on f6. Now, if I take you, you take me, and then if I take you, I'm not threatening anything anymore. You're actually in time to, well, first of all, the bishop is in a precarious position, but at the end of the day, you can win this pawn back, and maybe it's not so bad for me. Now, the only problem is, at the end of this long sequence, which I saw, once you take on d6, I actually don't have to take this piece first, which is what I was looking at originally, and I was thinking, well, that's not going to work, because take, and again, he's up a pawn, so what was all that for? The important thing is what you have to do is trust that this bishop is actually stuck. You take the bishop first, and then there's no way to get this bishop out without just sacking it for a pawn, but that's where things get a little bit interesting. And so what he did is finally take the knight that was on c6, and here's where it gets crazy though. This knight is still hanging. Now, I was a little bit worried about, and I ended up making this move, which was a blunder. I was looking at, well, if I take here, and then he takes here, is it possible that he's going to get his piece out? Because I was looking, well, maybe he can, you know, I'm going to have to move my piece back, and maybe there's some way he can weasel out like this, but there really isn't. But I was really worried about that, and I was thinking maybe I looked at a version where his knight's still on f3, and then he wins the pawn back at the end, and then I have to be a little bit careful because, you know, I'm only up a pawn here, and I'd probably rather have this position because I'm up a piece, but these 3 pawns could cause me damage. Now, at the end of the day, none of that happened. I did this move because I was so worried about possibly getting in a position where if I take this first, he has some like crazy, you know, takes here, takes, and I was looking at this, and again he's up a pawn. The only difference is that now my pawn's not here, and these pieces are great, and even taking with the knight isn't the best move, which is just crazy. Because I'm just like, what's the problem? Why would you move there? And the reason you move there instead of taking the pawn is because you want to avoid this pin, but that is neither here nor there. So I did here, it takes the pawn first, you have to take back, and then I still just basically said I'm going to trust that this bishop is just not going to be able to escape without taking a couple pawns with him, which I was still happy to do. I take. Now you ought to take back over here potentially for the fact that what I should have done is taken rook f3, but that didn't happen, and I probably would have even taken this bishop first, which again the right move is take here. This bishop is still trapped. If you take the knight right here, you're up a piece. And at the end of the day, when the dust settled, I was up an exchange, up another pawn, and then there's all kinds of threats on the board. I decided just to take the exchange fully, trade the pieces out. I just marched forward, and eventually I just sacked the knight with the rook because I knew I was going to win this endgame. Now, I probably let white get a lot too close here, honestly, because even if you move back, like here, you take here, here, and you just start moving stuff forward. This is probably letting white get a little bit too much because I'm going to have to come back down here, and then, I don't know, white just starts moving, and I'm pretty sure I can stop it, but at the end of the day, I was a little too concerned about that. Shouldn't have let that happen, but at the end of the day, the game kind of petered out, and another one in the bag. Okay, so this was a section of the game where I made some moves that probably weren't the best, but I knew that it might allow me to win a knight. So starting back a few moves here, I was like, okay, well, I just pushed the knight back. I thought it sucks to go back all the way here to b8, so I figured it was more than likely to go here. Now, if I play b4 immediately, he jumps in here, and then if I try to push him out with this move, he's able to escape over here. So what I basically said was, I don't know if it looks like his knight's about to fall, but if I just make a very quiet move over here to play f2, it's very sneaky, and you wouldn't immediately notice the threat of your knight because the move looks like I'm just trying to move out of the pin. And so basically the move you really need to play here is something like c5 or something a little more passive, play b6 or even b5. And the b5 just loses the pawn on the spot, so you really want to play this because then worst case scenario, if I do this move back here. Now this knight's kind of bad on this square, doesn't have a lot of prospects, but maybe if you play something, let me just make a random move here, and then you do this, well, now the knight has a square to jump back to, or if I just, you know, take, then your knight's totally fine over here. So anyways, the threat was missed because now you're just looking at bringing your queen to a better square, and then once you hit him with the threat of b4, there's nowhere for the knight to go. Either of these squares, you lose it. I actually do like playing the move knight c6, which it says just take the L on the knight because at the end of the day, they can move like this to attack the center. If I take, queen gets in the game, and now things are a lot more alive, and then this pawn's under pressure, and it basically says if I take this pawn, or I take the knight, well, at least my pawns are kind of stupid and doubled. But that didn't happen. He moved back here, but it does allow him to win the pawn. Oh, right, you know, here he takes. What you have to do is, yeah, take over here if you want to. But, let's see. Yes, so I took pawn, takes back, and then a few more moves happen. Okay, now here was a really interesting moment where I had one more kind of stupid idea that shouldn't have worked, but if you don't see it, it does. So obviously, the queen's right here, and it's got, you know, plenty of retreating squares to go to. It's got all these squares that it can jump to. Obviously, can't take the pawn because you lose it. The only problem is the more I looked at it, making these moves is fine. Making this move is fine as well. The only problem is it's really easy to want to make this move with check. The only problem is, after this really quiet move, bishop e3, the queen has nowhere to go. All of these squares are covered by a piece. The pawn's going to take here, the pawn's going to take here, bishop takes over here, pawn takes here, queen takes here, queen or knight takes, pawn takes, knight takes. And so I saw all this and I thought, well, surely he's just going to move back, but now I've got more pieces developed into the game. I've got a huge amount of space over here on the king side, and unfortunately, he missed that c5 traps the queen. And so after this, the game kind of petered out a little bit. I made some moves that were riskier than they need to be, especially right here, taking this first. Obviously, you can't take here because this gets pretty tough, pretty fast. That actually wasn't the best move because my queen could take here. But if you move back here, then I can hit you with something like this, even if I want to. And apparently, there's a few mate and threes if you don't take this move, which obviously seems pretty natural. But all I have to say, that would be hugely winning. And okay, threats here. Game goes on. Now, I played d3 here and he resigned. Now, obviously, I was originally thinking there's a move back here. Apparently, there's a couple mate and fours here if you don't play, or if you play this. I didn't see that. I just knew this was good because at the end of the day, I had this as a great check, which is just checkmate on the spot. So obviously, if you don't play this move, like let's just say you just make a random move like this, well, then it's checkmate on the spot. So just to show you an example of what one of the mate and fours looks like, play the move here, you take, king takes the pawn, queen d4 check, move the king over, and then you have a really fun checkmate, which is g4 check, only legal move is to move over, and then h4 checkmate. And that concludes that game. Moving on to the fourth one. Okay, I'm going to show the start of this game before going through it a little faster because there was a really cool tactic here that I was initially worried about, and then I realized it wasn't a problem. So I do this, obviously, just the threat of I want him to take here because then I've got a huge center. This pawn's under attack. This bishop will be able to get out with check. Obviously, you can block with the pawn, but you'd rather have a piece there. And so then my queen or my king can go over into hiding, and my other pieces can get out pretty quick. And so he pushes forward, which I think was a good move. And now I get some pretty rapid piece development here. Move the pawn forward just because you can't push because I'll take, but if you take here, it's this. There's no checks you can have on me that work. I get my pieces out pretty quick again. So here I pushed, and then I thought, oh my gosh, I've made a huge mistake. He's attacking this pawn. He's double attacking this pawn, and he's attacking this piece. I cannot defend them both. If I move over here to defend this one, then he can take this with check. And obviously, if I move over here, then he takes with check. The only problem is I realized something is that this pawn is undefended. So actually, I have this crazy move, d4 check, and wherever you go with a white king, you lose the queen on b4. And that game kind of started to fizzle out pretty quick after that, so I'll just go through the moves. Okay, so at this point in the game, I kind of steered it towards getting rid of some of those pieces because I thought, okay, well, his bishop's in the back rank. Both of his rooks are kind of locked out of the fight right now. It's a little easier for mine to get in the game and start pushing my pawn majority on the queen side. So got rid of the queens, winning the pawn, and then I thought, let me just cement my great bishop on c6, and then it gets really hard for him to make moves. And so here I made a huge mistake. I was looking at a line where if you do this, I was thinking I push this pawn, and then if you move back, you get skewered. The only problem is you have this check, and so after this, it all kind of just fizzles out. And that's pretty close to what could have happened in the game, but I played c4, took with the rook instead, then I take, then I move the rook over, and this looks dangerous because then I'm going to again do the same trick with rook b8, but you can do the check first. Well, you can defend your piece first. You should just do this, but you can defend the piece first, and then after a3, then you check, then you move the king up. Now, at this point, I was starting to feel pretty good because I was thinking, well, I've got control of the open file. His rook is still back here, not doing much. Yes, he can start pushing his majority, but I just thought maybe I'd be a little faster, especially with the position this bishop was in. So what I need to do first is I want to come in here and attack this pawn. But first, I got to deal with the bishop. Now, if you just take here, which is what happened in the game, then I just take and I'm totally fine here. And if you say, well, I'm going to defend all the pieces, then I hit you with this great move, c5, forces you back. Then I take, then you're forced back again. And this point, I just thought, I'm doing pretty good. I get to start marching this pawn up. I can just make a move like this, and then these moves come after the fact. So that didn't happen. He takes on a3, I take a5. He moves the bishop down here. I think that seems to be a mistake just because you're taking this bishop out of the game. But my advantage actually isn't quite as big anymore. So moves the rook over. It kind of makes sense that you might want to go right there, but this pawn isn't really under attack. And it seems like since I'm going to make this threat anyway and your king can't access these squares, you're going to want this piece over here. Your bishop can't access that square, so kind of a tempo mistake to not move your rook to c8 to begin with. That was a pretty big mistake just because it allows me to take here if I want to. Now, crazy enough, I didn't do that in the game because I was just a little bit like, well, move over here. I guess I can, oh, well, honestly, okay, this looks pretty good. I probably should have done that. I probably should have done that. But then I just thought, there's just checks, and then I'm going to lose this pawn, and he's going to get at least something. Having said that, this was obviously the right move, so I definitely should have done that instead. What I did do was play d6 check, which is just a bit cheeky because obviously you can't take with the king because of the pawn. And so if you do what he did, which is move forward, which is the best move, then I have takes over here. But it's kind of what I saw. Now the downside of if you take with, you can't take with this pawn either, obviously, because of the rook. So basically the next best move is here, but that's terrible because then I take, you can't take here, and then I'm going to win the pawn, or win the rook. You take, and then, again, it's just, I'm going to pick up all these pawns. I've got extra pawns. I've got an extra piece, and I'm going to win the game. So, move forward here, which basically makes a lot of sense. Because after this, then you have to play a move, which is, I guess, what he did, which is rook c8, which makes sense, obviously. Now, the thing I was looking at is, you can't play a move like a8 because a8 actually just drops the pawn, and then actually you're in a ton of danger, and the game's pretty close to equal according to the engine. You have to make a move like this to hold on, or do bishop d5 check, which makes a lot of sense, and then move your rook down. Now, obviously, if you go back here, you just want to hold on to the piece, or even play something like this, but that's very committal, so you can't really move the rook back. But then I started to realize here that actually the rook can't go anywhere. These pawns and the bishop cover this whole file, so there's actually nowhere you can go, nowhere you can get the king in. So I realized I can actually just start walking the king up. It's not the best move, but nothing stops me from just getting in there. Now, you do have to worry about this move where you move bishop to e3, and then you have to be a little bit careful, but you don't have to be that careful. Takes, and then I'm just up the piece here. So with that, hit him with the check first, then you move the rook. This pawn over there on h6 is going to fall. This is where you have to calculate a little bit just to make sure you don't lose that piece, but the game kind of fizzled out right here just because there's nothing you can really do with the bishop. I'm going to win this pawn, and if you go over here to try to block me over there, I can just play h4. You're going to start crashing through. It can even just eventually just make a random move. Go over here. I just sack the piece, and then I'm going to queen one of these pawns, and the game ends like that.